Hello everyone. So we continue our presentation for lecture 1 with an introduction to security. So security is of paramount importance. During the last decades, basically online communities and services have experienced a significant amount of growth, and even novice users without any programming skills or computing skills, they can join and start exchanging information with strangers and even store possible sensitive information on remote locations. Just think how easy for anyone is to download applications like Dropbox, and after a few clicks start sending their personal files for storage on remote locations that they do not own, they do not operate, and basically they don't even know how they actually work. Now, during this time, we have observed that companies often store users' data without protecting them from unauthorized access. We have seen many different attacks, and we have even seen credit card payment systems that have been raided, while the leakage of sensitive information has become a daily phenomenon. Keep in mind, though, that most of the security flaws occur because of bad implementations, which means that we might design perfectly secure cryptographic systems, but then once we give these specifications to a developer that will be responsible for creating, let's say, a service based on our perfectly secure system, the implementation might contain some bugs or some inefficiencies or some bad implementations, and these bugs would give the opportunity to possible malicious adversaries like hackers to expose vulnerabilities of our systems. Now, to highlight the importance of the field, I thought of quoting what a Stanford professor in the field of applied cryptography said in one of his interviews. So Dan Bonnet, he said that I bet you that if I went to sleep now and woke up in 100 years, computer security would be as exciting then as it is today. So it's going to be a research area that's of interest to humanity for many, many years to come. Therefore, I really think that your choice of studying security and applied cryptography, it was a really wise one. Now, some bad news and some good ones. So let's start with the bad ones. A successful cyber attack can cause major damage to a business. It can affect business bottom line as well as its standing and consumer trust. And the impact of a security breach can be broadly divided into three main categories: reputational, financial, and legal. To understand the reputational damage, we need to have in mind that trust is an essential element of customer business relationship, and cyber attacks can damage the reputation of a business and erode the trust of customers. This in turn could potentially lead to loss of customers, and if you lose customers, basically immediately you will experience a loss of sales, and by losing on sales, then basically you will immediately experience a reduction in your profits, right? So we can see how there's a chain between these events, right? So you get a damage in your reputation, and immediately you face some financial impact. Now, regarding the legal consequences, keep in mind that data protection and privacy laws require the management of all personal data that a company holds, and this is not only customers' data, but even employees' data, right? The staff that is working for this for each company. Now, if this data is accidentally compromised and the company has failed to deploy appropriate security measures, the company may face fines and regulatory sanctions. Now, about the good news, first of all, there are currently many open IT security positions, and most of them are really well paid. In other words, probably if you decide to follow this path in your future career, you will not face any unemployment issues. Now, the other thing that I find really exciting is that security, personally, I see it as a fascinating endless game, an endless game between an attacker and the defender, right? So imagine that when you start building a security system, what you do is that you try to figure out all the possible behaviors that an attacker may follow in order to bypass the security of the system, right? So that's why I mean with the word game. Okay, so you always try to mimic the attacker's behavior in order to protect your systems. Now, the study of the hidden, so we've got cryptography. Cryptography is divided into two categories. We've got cryptology, which is divided into two categories, cryptography and cryptanalysis. So cryptography, let's say, is the art of hiding information, of protecting information, while cryptanalysis is a set of methods that they try to attack cryptography and prove that, okay, this algorithm is not as secure as it should be, right? In this course, we will be mainly focused on cryptography, which is in turn divided into three broad categories: symmetric encryption, asymmetric encryption, and security protocols. So in the beginning of this course, we will be describing in a high level how symmetric and asymmetric encryption works. So we will not get into all the technical details of the algorithms, okay, but we will learn the basics, okay, their limitations, how we can use them, what is the input and the output of each algorithm, and so on and so forth. And then we will show how we can use these algorithms basically in order to build security protocols that will allow two or more parties to communicate securely. Now, before we move on, I'd like to introduce you three entities that will be following us throughout the entire course, and this is Alice, Bob, and Eve. So imagine that Alice and Bob are two good friends, and having good friendships, it's nice because basically it allows you to share a secret with them, right? So imagine that Alice wishes to share a secret with Bob, and then imagine that we have an evil guy in the middle, which is called Eve, and what she tries to do is to overhear the communication between Alice and Bob, with main aim to basically understand exactly the secret that Alice is trying to send to Bob, right? Good. So if we want to, transfer this example from the physical world to the digital world, imagine that Alice is the client. So imagine that Alice is the browser of your laptop, while Bob is a server, right? So imagine that Alice is using her browser to send some sensitive data to the server Bob, right? And Eve is a malicious adversary who is just overhearing the communication channel between these two guys, these two ends, Alice and Bob. Now, our goal is basically to frustrate Eve. And how we can frustrate Eve? Very simple, by revealing nothing about the contents of the exchange message, right? It doesn't matter how complicated the services that we are building are or might be. Our goal will be more or less always the same, right? Frustrating Eve. Now, in order to make you remember our goal in a bit more visual way, I thought of adding a video from a well-known TV series. It's called The IT Crowd. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you do. It's really hilarious with a very nice sense of humor. So let's go and see the video.
Hello, do you wish for technical assistance?
Oh, God, I hate these.
Sorry?
What?
How dare you speak to me like that?
Sorry. Can I have technical assistance, please?
Putting you through, cow.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello, can I buy your assistance?
What?
Can I buy your assistance?
I've got one of your laptops. It won't get past the loading screen.
Have you tried the connected dans again?
Yes, look, is there someone else I can talk to?
There is no one available.
All right.
Which model do you have?
What model do I have?
Yes.
It's a Zubion, I think.
Oh, you have to say we have been having problems with the video. Can you present it?
I didn't get that.
Can you press the little wheel starting up?
No, that was worse somehow.
Can you press
Can you press
delete?
delete? Can I press delete? Heel.
Heel?
Heat.
Heel. Burin?
While.
Yes, heel.
Yes.
Stortien?
Right. So I don't know. Maybe it wasn't a great example for what I want to say. But anyway, what I want you to have in mind when you are thinking about our main goal is basically the face of that lady at the end of the video when she calls the technical support, and she tries to understand basically what the guy at the other end of the line trying to say to her, but then at the end she can't understand anything, so she gives up. So that's what we want to achieve basically with Eve, right? To frustrate her so that she will give up on any try to break the security of the communication between Alice and Bob. Now, what is security about? So security is about three main things. Prevention, which is how to take measures that prevent our assets from being damaged. Detection, if we face a cyber attack, basically then we need to detect when this happened, how and by whom, and which assets basically has been damaged. And finally, the reaction, which is how to take measures so that we can recover our assets or to recover from a damage to our assets. Apart from that, we have three main security goals. So the first one is confidentiality, which implies that information should be available for reading only to authorized members. So we've got Alice, she sends a secret to Bob. They need to make sure that only Alice and Bob, only these two parties, will be able to access the contents of the secret. Then we've got integrity, which says that we need to be able to detect if data was modified from the source to the destination. Let's see an example. So Alice is sending her secret to Bob, but now Eve is in the middle. She intercepts that message, and even though she cannot read its content, so its confidentiality, it's protected, what she can do is that she can replace it with a fake message, right? So what she will do is that she will contact Bob saying, "Hello, Bob, I'm Alice, and here is the message I've got for you." Right? Upon reception, Bob should be able to understand that something is wrong there, right? Something is wrong with the received message, so the integrity of the message is not correct. And then once he identifies that, he will drop the connection. And finally, we've got the availability, which means that resources of our services should be available to authorized parties 24/7. So till now, we've got only one user, Alice, who is sending one request to Bob. And upon reception, Bob, he either replies back to Alice or anyhow he needs to do some internal computation, right? That's how it usually works. Now imagine that instead of just having Alice, we have multiple users or millions of users that they simultaneously start bombarding Bob with requests. At some point, Bob might not be in position of replying to all of these requests, right? And this will end up in what we say a denial of service attack, right? Which means that our service will not be available. Now, some people really confuse confidentiality with privacy. So do you think that it's equal? So the words confidentiality and privacy are often confused or perceived to be equivalent terms, but they actually represent completely different concepts. The precise definitions for these, let's say, troublesome words often depend on the context, right? So both of them affect the data that we provide and collect about us on a daily basis. But to state the difference between confidentiality and privacy, I would say that confidentiality is about the data, while privacy is about the individual. Okay, and this is a really big fundamental difference, right? So privacy can be defined as the ability of an individual to be forgotten or at least free from public attention. And in this sense, an individual doesn't have to be a person, it can even be an organization or any distinct entity. Now, keep in mind that guaranteeing privacy means guaranteeing that data cannot uniquely identify any individual, and this is very important. So, by guaranteeing privacy, for example, you guarantee that you protect users from kind of attacks like profiling, okay, services that they can make the profile of users and so on. Now, Protecting privacy is much harder than protecting confidentiality, and most organizations have certain processes that identify sensitive data they want to protect with confidentiality controls or with privacy controls or with both, right? Now, there are some examples, some typical examples about privacy. The one that I want to highlight is a research that took place back in 2000, and some researchers basically found out that 87% of all the Americans could likely be identified with only 3 pieces of information, and this was the zip code, the gender, and the date of birth, right? So the research basically showed that privacy is such a difficult problem because it takes only a very small piece of data to identify individuals. Now, one of the hottest topics these days in the field of applied cryptography is what is called differential privacy. So I suggest you have a look at it, just at least to get an idea of what it is. Right, so shift cipher. So shift cipher is a historical cipher that operates on letters, and the main idea is that we replace basically every letter in the original message by another letter some fixed number of positions down the alphabet. One of the most well-known shift cipher is what we call a Caesar's cipher. Now you can try the Caesar cipher on the link that you can see on the right on your screen. Now the Caesar cipher is named of course after Julio Caesar, who used it with a shift of 3, which means that A becoming D when encrypting and D becoming A when decrypting, as you can see in the table here. And he was using it to protect messages of military significance. Now, Caesar cipher is one of the simplest and most widely known encryption techniques, and for a Caesar shift, we have a key which is basically the number by which we shift the alphabet, since this provides a unique way to describe the ciphertext alphabet easily. Now, about the encryption, of Caesar cipher is pretty easy and straightforward. First, we must create basically the ciphertext alphabet, which is simply found by shifting the alphabet to the left by the number of places given by the key. Hence, a shift of 1 moves A to the end of the ciphertext alphabet, while B to the left 1 place into the first position. Now, as the key gets bigger, the letters shift further along until we get to a shift of 26 when A has found its way back to the front, right? So it's like a circle. In the example we can see in the screen, basically we've got a shift of 3. Now, once we have created this table, the encryption process is easy, as we just replace each occurrence within the plain text of a letter within the corresponding ciphertext letter. So imagine that we want to encrypt, for example, the letter cat. Okay, so C corresponds basically, we look at the table and we see that letter C corresponds to F, right? We then look for letter A and take the ciphertext letter D, and finally T that maps to W. And the whole thing gives us basically the sequence of letters F, D, W, which is the encrypted version of the word cat. Now, once we want to decrypt, we just follow the same procedure, but vice versa, right? So from the bottom line to the up line. So the mapping of the cipher of the encrypted letters to the original letters. Now, how we can break this cipher? So breaking this cipher, it's pretty easy. So if it is known that we are, we got a ciphertext and encrypted message that is has been encrypted by using the shift cipher, but the key is unknown, then it is fairly simply to break the code by simply what we call a brute force attack, an exhaustive key search. So this simply means that we use a trial and error approach to attack the cipher. The main weakness of the shift cipher is the fact that there are only 26 possible keys, right? Because yeah, it's just all the possible letters that we have in the alphabet, right? So we can very easily write a program and check all the possible keys and basically find out the key that was used for encrypting. Now, another method for breaking this cipher is like using the letter frequency analysis. So the methodology behind frequency analysis relies on the fact that in any language, each letter has its own personality, let's say, right? So the most obvious trait that letters have is the frequency with which they appear in a language. Now, in English, the letter Z, for example, appears far less frequent than, say, A. So in the graph on the right of your screen, you can basically see, for example, that letter E is the most commonly used in Greek, in English alphabet, and so on. So by observing the ciphertext and looking at the frequency table, you can quite easily break the ciphertext. Now, modular arithmetic. So most of you already know what this is. So we do modular arithmetic several times every day when we are thinking about time, basically. So imagine, for example, that you are going on a train trip at 11 p.m. that lasts 3 hours, right? So what time will you arrive? 11 plus 3 equals to 14. But in our case, you will arrive at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? So not 14, that it's 2 in the afternoon. So that's because on a 2-hour clock, you start counting from the beginning again after you get to 12, while on a 24-hour clock, you start again after you get to 24, and so on and so forth, right? So in modulo, imagine that we have the same clock, but instead of starting from 12, on the top we have 0. Now let's try to define basically the shift cipher that we described earlier by using the modular arithmetic. So let x, y, and k belong to z26, where z26 is the set of integers from 0 to 25, right? And 26 is basically the number of letters that we've got in English alphabet, right? So with Z26, we can map each letter of the alphabet to a number. Good. Now the encryption would take as input two parameters, x and k. So x is the letter that we wish to encrypt, and k is the key, the shift, right? So encryption would be equal to x plus k modulo 26, while decryption will take as input y, which is the result of the previous step of the encryption, plus the key, the same key that we used for encryption, and it will be equal to y minus k mod 26. To be honest, minus and plus here are exactly the same, okay? It doesn't change. Now, what happens when k is equal to 26? So as we said, we already in Z26, we map each element of the set, each number, to a letter in the alphabet, right? So 0 maps to A, 1 to B, 2 to C, and so on. Now, if we go to 26, which means that we have already finished the alphabet, we start again from the very beginning. I call this in a non-academic term, the Pac-Man effect, right? So we go to we reach the end, the edge, and then we start all over again. So A can be is mapped to 0 and to 26, and basically we can map it to an infinite with an infinite possible numbers. Now the good thing about finite fields, about modulo, is to perform operations on finite fields. So a more formal definition of modulo, let A, R, and M belong to Z. We say that A is equivalent to R mod M if and only if M divides A minus R. So 26 mod 26 equals to 0, which maps to A. 27 mod 26 equals to 1, which maps to B. 28 mod 26 maps to C, and if we continue doing this and increasing the number by 1, anyway, we can find that, for example, 258 mod 26 equals to 24, which maps to X. Right, so Kerckhoffs's principle, it's one of the fundamental principles that we use in cryptography. So it says that the crypto system should be secure even if everything about the system except the key is publicly available. It's public knowledge. Okay, so let's try to translate this. So we've got if our malicious adversary. So she needs to have access to both the encryption and the decryption, right? So Eve needs to know exactly all the technical details of both algorithms, the encryption and the decryption, okay? And what she cannot know, though, is the secret key that we used in order to perform the actual encryption. So she knows everything but the secret key, right? So we need to make sure that always the secret key remains secret, remains public, private. Otherwise, there's no security. Good. And the last slide is about Edgar Allan Poe. So I don't know how many of you knows Edgar Allan Poe. He was an American writer and poet, and he was best known for his poetry and short, innovative stories, particularly his tales of horror and mystery, who have left, I think, a timeless mark on the literature. Now, you might be wondering what Poe has to do with the field of cryptography and security. So Poe was really fascinated by cryptography, and this happened during his military service in the U.S. Army, where ciphers were really a routine. So in 1839, Poe issued the challenge to a magazine called the Alexander's Weekly Messenger, stating that he could solve any simple substitution cipher submitted by readers for the magazine. And on top of that, to make this a bit more tempting, he was also offering a free subscription to the magazine to anyone who could send him a cipher that he could not crack. So the result was that Poe managed to solve around 100 ciphers, except two of them which remained unsolved for over 150 years. Now, in 1843, Poe wrote a short story called The Gold Bug that centers on the solution of a cipher. And this is one of the basically most well-known works of Poe. Now, why I'm mentioning him, it's for two main reasons. So, first of all, the sensation that Poe created with his cryptography stance played a major role into popularizing cryptograms in newspapers and magazines. In other words, he managed basically to give great visibility of the field to people that they didn't know about it. Okay. However, bear in mind that Poe himself, he wasn't he wasn't on the scientific side of cryptography, right? So he was mostly using his analytical skills to break simple ciphers like the Caesar cipher that we showed earlier. Okay. Now, the other reason for putting this slide here is that I think in all of the cryptography related books that I have read, I have never seen a single mention to Edgar Allan Poe, and I thought that someone needs to give some credit to this great writer and poet. Right, so that's it. Thanks a lot. See you later.